Strieber. I'm the host for Dreamland this week because I wanted to get a chance to talk to Marie D. Jones, who has written an extraordinary book called Science, but it's spelled differently. It's spelled capital P-S-I-E-N-C-E. Science. And what is science? Well, we're going to find out from Marie. Hi, Marie.
Hi. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, it's delightful to talk to you. I wanted to start with a little bit of explanation, and then I want you to take off from there.
Okay.
About 20 years ago, I realized that the kind of science I was taught in school, which might be called Newtonian science, was all wrong. And so I set out to gain a layman's understanding of quantum physics, even though I have no background in science. And I was able to do it. And I'm glad about this because if I can do it, anybody can do it. And the truth is, we've all got to do it because this is the way the world really works. Now, about 20 years ago also, my husband Whitley started having these UFO experiences we call the communion experiences. And we started getting letters. We got 500,000 letters, and I read them all from people who were having these crazy paranormal, if you want to call it that, UFO sightings, experiences. And I began to realize that these made sense when you looked at them from the quantum point of view. So what do you think about that, Marie?
Well, it's funny because I have a very similar background. I've loved science. I'm not a scientist, but my father's a geophysicist. So I kind of grew up with science, reading and taking classes in college. But the quantum physics part of it I got into through my more metaphysical pursuits. And I always thought it was really strange that there was this wonderful science that they really weren't talking about in the school setting, in the academic setting. And yet now, all these years later, as you said, it really seems to be exploding into people's consciousness, and everybody wants to learn about it, and we've got all these wonderful books coming out. And I think because quantum physics talks about the behavior of particles and matter and energy at the most minute level, and we see such bizarre behavior at that level, we're then able to look at things like paranormal phenomena like UFOs and ghosts and psychic abilities and see that there is not only a connection, but that they're really not so bizarre after all. Because when you look at quantum physics, that's where things get really bizarre. So I've had a real similar background in finding over the last 10, 20 years all these connections between what I was learning about in the paranormal field and what I was learning about in quantum physics. And I think it's really exciting because now a lot more people are starting to make those connections.
Well, this book is actually, as well as being a book that explores all kinds of wonderful things like remote viewing, but it also is a wonderful primer, a basic text for understanding quantum physics.
Yeah, and that was my intention. I really knew before I wrote the book that I wanted it to be broken into 3 parts. And I thought, what is my audience? I can't necessarily assume that people are going to know a lot about paranormal. I can't necessarily assume they're going to know a lot about quantum physics or consciousness research. So I thought, well, I'm going to introduce concepts in a way that I think everybody could understand. I figure if I could understand them as I'm writing them, the reader will be able to understand. And I really wanted to break it down where first I have sort of an introduction into the paranormal. And then we go into a sort of quantum physics 101 course. And then the third part of the book, I kind of put everything together and hopefully have set the stage in the prior 2 sections for all of those connections that I'm going to make. It was really important to me, because I'm not a scientist, that I wrote it in a way that I would understand if I were picking up the book for the first time and learning about this stuff for the first time.
You don't have to be afraid of this book, folks, because it is very accessible. It really is. You've done a wonderful job here, Marie. And
thank you.
It also takes us where we all live here on Dreamland. Is what we're interested in is these I hate to use the word paranormal, but that seems to be the only word around, these paranormal things, but we're not interested in believing in them. We're interested in investigating them because these have happened to people.
Right,
to
exactly. We know they're there. We're trying to figure out, well, what are they? Where do they come from? What's behind them? What is manifesting them? So we know that they exist. Millions of people have seen and experienced all kinds of things. I think to deny that any of these things are real is bad science. But what we need to do now is try to figure out what they are, where they're coming from, and what our role might be in assisting their manifestation.
Well, tell me, I'd like you to pick one of these things and explain to us how quantum physics might have a reason for this, might explain this. I mean, like being a psychic or being a medium or remote viewing or something like that.
That's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's one of the best areas of psi or the paranormal or the unknown or mysterious, whatever umbrella term you want to give it. That's one of the best areas that you can see the real connections. When we talk about psychic abilities, ESP, remote viewing, the ability to know the future, to see into a distant location, what happens is when we look at quantum physics, we look at some of the most basic principles, we start to see some really interesting connections. And one of them is Bell's theorem of non-locality. Now, this is named after a theoretical physicist, John Bell. And basically, the theory states that particles are all connected on a level beyond time and space. And they can affect each other. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance.
Yes, uh-huh.
And another concept is the theory of entanglement, that once particles come in contact with each other, they remain in contact. They remain entangled, even at vast distances, and they affect each other instantaneously, suggesting that we can beat light speed, that there's something going on here where we're able to beat the speed of light. So those are two real basic theories in quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and yet if you think about what those imply, we're all connected. Everything is connected beyond the space and time. We're all entangled. Therefore, wouldn't it make sense that some of us, if not all of us, are able to look into the future, see what other people are doing even though they're not in the room, remote view a particular location halfway around the world? I mean, if everything is indeed connected by this sort of invisible web of reality, this underlying reality, David Bohm, one of my favorite physicists, called it the implicate order. The explicate order is what we see and perceive on the outside. But there's this implicate underlying order, and if that's all connected, it makes sense that people who are much more in tune with their own ability to do it can connect with other human beings, with other living things, with objects at a remote distance. And that, to me, it makes so much sense.
Well, I know a lot of psychics and mediums. I just happen to have fallen into this.
Yeah.
And I find, and remote viewers, I've met a bunch of government remote viewers many years ago when this was supposed to be a secret program.
Right.
And we've had quite a few of them on our show. And I find that they don't really know the future, but what they know is the present. But
right.
They know a present that the others, that we can't see.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, they don't tell your fortune, but they tell you what's going on with you right now.
Exactly, or they can tell you where you left your car keys. Yeah. Because they're able to see objects in the present that we can't perceive with our own eyes. And it's interesting because I think there are different gifts that are given to different people, or different people are able to manifest different gifts. Some people are able to see into the future. And another really interesting theory about quantum physics that helps to explain all of that is the concept of the zero-point field. And this is a field of energy. It's like a sea of energy that we're all swimming in. We're like fish in the ocean, and it fills every inch of empty space. And it's basically particles that pop in and out of existence, and they're fluctuating and vibrating at almost a state of absolute zero momentum. And it's sort of like a force field of all other fields. And Hal Puthoff calls it the self-regenerating grand ground state of the universe.
We know Hal Puthoff.
So basically, I love his work. And basically this is this field that contains everything in it, all matter, all particles, all energy, all past, present, future, you name it. And so maybe we have people that are able to tap into this zero-point field and access information there about the past, about the present, as in the case of remote viewers, or, maybe what's coming, as in the case of clairvoyance and people who have dreams of the future and visions. So it's really interesting to see these theories that are being talked about in the quantum world that sound so bizarre and have such great implications for all of the things that we are looking at and investigating in the quote-unquote paranormal world.
Well, I think that the average person today can be compared to somebody in medieval times and who thought that if they just kept walking far enough, they would fall off the edge of the earth because it was flat.
Right.
We really don't know what the world is like that we're living in. It's much more extraordinary.
It's amazing, and I have a funny feeling we may never know.
Really? You don't think quantum physics is going to find out the answers?
I have this belief, and I know that I'm not alone in it, that our reality is ever changing, and that each time we uncover one mystery and maybe get the answer to something, it transforms into something else. And this goes to, what's talked about later in the book, which is the role of the observer and the role of our own consciousness in creating what we perceive as our reality.
Oh, I want to talk to you about that. I think we'll wait till after we take a break, but because I know there's something called Fisher information, which basically says that we create our own reality. And in What the Bleep, that wonderful film, What the Bleep Do We Know?
Yes.
One of the quantum physicists says, quantum physics says that we create our own reality. So every day I wake up and I say, it's going to be a great day. And you know what?
Right.
It always is.
Oh, he's good at that, boy. I still haven't quite mastered that.
Yeah, but I thought, boy, if one of the best scientists on the earth says that, heck, I can too, because one thing we're all looking for is, well, how can we use this new knowledge in our own lives?
Exactly. Otherwise, it's exciting and interesting, but kind of meaningless if it doesn't apply to us in a personal sense. I totally agree with that.
And it seems to me that the concept of perhaps creating our reality or perhaps getting into a parallel universe where there's a better reality, if this is possible, might be one way to use it.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Well, we're going to take a little break now, and then we'll be right back, and we're going to talk about some of Marie's adventures in the paranormal. We'll be right back.
Subscribers, don't miss the video that we've found. It's now in the subscriber section. It's the moment I actually discovered the secret school, which happened during the making of a pilot in 1996, a TV pilot that has until now been completely unaired. Nobody's ever seen it before. I think you'll find it fascinating.
Tell me about some of your adventures. You've had so many phenomenal adventures, and you talk about them in your book.
I've had some experiences of my own. I've been around people that have had tons of experiences, which I think comes with the territory when you're doing investigations. In my own life, I've had some fairly convincing experiences. One when I was a teenager with a friend of mine who had a poltergeist in her home. And, I heard all kinds of horrible stories about it, and I didn't want to go stay overnight ever. And she'd always ask me, and I finally surrendered and caved in, and I was absolutely terrified. I would not leave her bedroom. And I really needed to go to the bathroom at one point during the night, and I just would not go in the hallway. But nothing happened. And the next morning we were watching a movie down in her family room, and I felt something move across me. And it did not feel like a breeze or a wind or, anything that I had ever felt before. And my friend was sitting behind me, and she said, did you feel that? And I just knew that I had felt something that was not normal. And of course, it was it was hard for me because I heard stories from her family and her grandparents, and I knew everything that was going on. And I really, as frightened as I was, I really wanted to see proof. That's all I got. But what I learned from that experience at a very early age is that there are things going on. And even if you don't see it personally yourself, sometimes you got to go on faith. These people were terrified. They were not seeking media attention. This is a reality for them. I had an experience not too long ago with a cat that had died, a very beloved cat.
Oh, I've had cat experiences. Tell me yours.
Yeah. For years, when my cat was alive, it would jump up on the bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, every morning, and sleep at the foot of the bed and wait for us to wake up. And after the cat died, we continued to feel something jump up at the foot of the bed, see the sort of impression on the quilt as if there was a cat there. And that went on for a while. It faded away after time, and I really started to feel like as my connection, as I was letting the cat go, the manifestation faded away, which is another wonderful example of maybe how your own consciousness helps to create these events, or at least has some interaction with them.
Marie, the Egyptians who were obsessed with the afterlife mummified cats and worshipped cats.
Yes, isn't that something?
And I think cats are some kind of conduits to the next world, because my cat, who was dead at the time, visited me when I almost died in the hospital.
Wow, that's amazing.
And I also recently talked to Maureen Caudell, who had experiences with her dead cat.
I've heard so many people who were cat owners and cat lovers talk about that. And I actually know a few people that had dogs that they loved dearly. But it does seem that cats are a little more, you hear about that a little more often.
It's very strange, isn't
mysterious. It? Yeah, I think they're very connected creatures. I think that they've got a lot more wisdom about what's really going on than we humans do.
Well, my cat took me to the world of the dead.
Yeah, there you go. I would love to get in the minds of animals because, you see them looking around at things. I have another cat, and she's always looking at something, and I can't see it. And I know that we have a very limited, spectrum. The light spectrum that we're able to see is very limited. And I'm thinking, what's in the room with us? What is she seeing? Is it good? Is it bad? Do I need to leave the room? But they're very connected.
Well, tell me one thing. When people see ghosts, very often they see orbs, and you have a wonderful orb photo in your book.
Yes, Joshua Warren provided that for me.
And
wonderful photo.
We've interviewed a lot of people over the years who have seen orbs, who have photographed orbs. We've put up photographs of these. We once sold a videotape of a wonderful person who showed a lot of orbs. And how could orbs be explained by quantum physics if they are ghosts?
It seems like I've heard two different trains of thought, or two different schools of thought, I should say, on what orbs are. And some people will say that they appear to be random and just kind of, do their thing and then dissipate or disappear. And other people have said that they seem to have maybe not a consciousness, but they seem to interface with the people that are seeing them. They seem to have some kind of an awareness. And I think both of those schools of thought have a basis in quantum physics, because what we're talking about is the transference of energy. Whatever an orb is, and I don't know, I wouldn't even venture to guess if it's a type of ghost or, someone's soul. I mean, I really don't know what it is. It could just be a manifestation of energy. And we do know that the sphere shape is one of the most popular and, wonderful, glorious shapes in nature because it serves such a function. It's so functional. So whatever's happening is this energy is coming to us from somewhere else. If we look at quantum physics, either we could say this energy might be coming from the zero-point field. It may be created from the energy in the field. It's manifesting in our reality, and then it's going back to the field. Some other people have talked about it possibly being interdimensional. It could be energy that is in another dimension that we don't normally have access to, that is sort of leaking through. And the same thing with a parallel universe. It's leaking through. Something is creating the opportunity for the energy to leak from one reality to the other, which is why they're often so fleeting and hard to pin down, because they're just sort of popping in for a visit and then popping right back out. So if we believe that the theories in quantum physics, like interdimensional the fact that we have more than 3 spatial dimensions, possibly as many as 11 or 12. If we believe the theory of parallel universes, and a lot of theoretical physicists think that there are an infinite number of them.
They know that there are at least 9. That's what they've agreed on.
Why could we not further, take that one step further and say it has to be possible for energy to get from one to the other? Maybe we haven't figured out how to make that happen in a consistent basis, but it's like when you listen to a radio and sometimes you get a little interference, or you're on your cell phone and you get a little interference. Stuff is getting through. How we can create that on a more consistent basis, I think that's probably the goal of every paranormal investigator on the planet.
I wonder if love does not help us to become more entangled, because I always thought that perhaps my cat visited me because I had given him so much love, and we had become entangled.
So, yeah. Your emotions. Emotions have energy. We look at the emotions of love and the emotions of hate, the 2 great emotions, and how much energy they create. Well, that energy has to go somewhere. And if it's being directed towards another living thing, it does create a connection on that implicate level. And I think that just as we can be entangled with someone that we meet at a party and we shake each other's hands and say, hey, how are you doing? I think we're also exchanging the more subtle energies constantly with people, which is why it becomes so important that people realize everything we say and do and feel affects everyone else at this implicate level. How profound is that?
And we want to become entangled with others in the right way.
Exactly.
Because look what's happening to our world when we are becoming entangled in the wrong way through clashing religions and beliefs.
Exactly.
It's getting pretty scary. I want to tell you a little story real quick, and then we'll take another break. A friend of mine who happens to be a medium and I are both kind of becoming surrogate mothers for our goddaughter because her mother is dying, and her mother just died, actually. Now, this woman who just died was a great massage therapist. But my friend, the medium, didn't know this. And I was talking to my friend on the phone this morning, and she said, I really need to get a massage.
Oh, my gosh. Isn't that something?
And I thought, she's being visited by that mother who's saying, now take care of my daughter.
Exactly. That energy is still there, and it probably will always be there in some form if we're intuitive enough to pick up on it.
Yeah.
And
I think our love for her daughter has entangled us with her, has entangled my friend with her who had never met her.
Absolutely. I think it's like the 6 degrees of separation. Maybe we should call it the 6 degrees of entanglement.
I think we should. And on that, I'm going to take a little break. We'll be right back. I'm back with Marie D. Jones, the author of Science, only it's Psience. And Marie, you have a website, mariedjones.com. Have I got the URL right?
I'm sorry?
Have I got the yes? Mm-hmm.
mariedjones.com.
Yeah. And but I think that people ought to, they can get some information from your website, but this book is really fun. I'm enjoying it tremendously. Now, tell us what else have you learned about the paranormal things that you investigated? What else have you learned through quantum physics as a way to understand these?
Well, we can talk about UFOs because I think that's the big one, the one that everybody is interested in.
That's the elephant in the room, Marie.
Right, the one that everybody insists isn't there, but is.
but I've talked to 500,000 people who've seen it.
Exactly. And I'm sure there's millions more that haven't come out and said so.
Oh, absolutely, come out of the UFO closet. But go on.
There you go. And it seems like, when you look into the different cases, there's a lot of different things going on. And we have unidentified flying objects that are obviously just being misidentified.
Oh, yeah.
We have people that are reporting military prototypes that they just don't know exist. And we also have people reporting nuts and bolts craft that really seem to be coming from, some other point in the universe or maybe another universe. the more nuts and bolts UFOs. But we also have so many cases that sort of defy all of that and almost seem to present sort of an interdimensional quality, and also suggest that our consciousness may have something to do with their appearance and their manifestation and even their behavior. And I think those are the most fascinating. Now, the last two, the ones that are the nuts and bolts UFOs coming from other universes, coming from our own universe, and the more interdimensional, what we can look at in quantum physics is, for example, parallel universes, other dimensions. If there are advanced civilizations out there, advanced entities, they may have figured out, first of all, a way to get across vast distances of time and space with a very little energy output. And one of the things that they could be using is the zero-point energy in the zero-point field. It's unlimited. It never runs out. You refuel as you go. It's massive and infinite, and it would be a cheap, unlimited source of energy for a UFO to travel from one point to another.
They've certainly got some propulsion method that we don't know about yet.
Exactly. I mean, we're just now, doing our research into ways to extract zero-point energy, and I think so far we've probably, according to Hal Puthoff, we've managed to get enough to fill a little tiny thimble and flap the wings of a butterfly. But the potential is there. Again, if we look at things like parallel universes, well, okay, can we look at maybe something like the concept of wormholes as a shortcut between parallel universes? And, this is where you start looking at the different theories that are out there, not just in quantum physics, but theoretical physics, and maybe putting two and two together. And again, maybe these advanced civilizations have figured out a way to use shortcuts through time and space to get not just from point A to point B in our universe, but maybe point A in our universe to point A in a parallel universe, and also possibly to be traveling across the landscape of time.
Our co-host of Dreamland, William Henry, what he does is he combs legends and myths and tries to find real science in them.
Oh, yes.
And he calls these wormholes stargates, and he thinks that ancient civilizations may have known about them. But this knowledge has been forgotten when we started getting into the, technological age. And we decided that it was impossible. But he thinks that there is a lot of evidence in these ancient legends that earlier cultures knew about these wormholes.
It's amazing if we look back at ancient religions and mythologies and creation stories, how much hard science is hidden under that beautiful storytelling language. And that was their way of talking about the universe that they saw around them. They told stories. Now we're trying to talk in scientific terminology, and we're getting real technical about it. And
we totally discount their stories. Yeah,
exactly. I think they knew everything that we're trying to find out.
Yeah, well, or at least they might have known it on a different level, a different way. Yeah.
And what's interesting about the Stargate idea is that, we can look to science fiction writers and fantasy writers to get ideas of where science might be heading, because, you had science fiction writers talking about stargates and portals long before the idea of, the wormholes became somewhat acceptable in theoretical physics. So it's interesting how myth and story and the imagination always seem to be way ahead of the game. We just don't look at it that way because we're so left brain and we're so analytical, and we think the hard science, that's the only place we're going to find answers. But I think that we do need to go look back at what's already been discovered.
Well, quantum physicists, use their minds mostly, and of course that has to do with using your imagination. So they're one group of scientists that do this. That's one reason Stephen Hawking went into the field, because he knew he was going to become paralyzed, and he realized this was a field where he could do only needed to use his mind. And they don't use the word imagination, but that's what they're using too.
It is. I don't know why they don't like that word. Einstein liked the word imagination.
Well, yes, and I think that he wouldn't have gotten nearly as far as he did. But Einstein couldn't cut quantum physics.
No, he
that was too much for him.
Not going to work.
Yep.
He's up there just shaking his head, saying, "I'll be darned."
Yep. Well, you know, an interesting thing I'm going to throw at you just before the break is that in my reading of these many letters from people who had these UFO experiences, I found that a great percentage of them had seen dead friends and relatives along with aliens.
Right.
Now, what does quantum physics tell you about that one?
That's wow.
And that's not in the literature, because the UFO literature is as rigid as any other.
It is.
And they never mention this, but I read this again and again and again.
You know, one would have to wonder if these advanced entities are giving people a glimpse of the zero-point field, where the presence and energy of dead relatives and loved ones would be stored. It's almost like Edgar Cayce's Akashic Book of Records, and, you know, everything that's ever happened and existed is stored in this field. The information is there. And perhaps as people are coming into contact with certain entities, they're being given a glimpse of this repository of information that they can't normally access in their daily lives.
And you know, these bug-eyed aliens, the ones with the big dark eyes, seem to be, they're like cats. They seem to be some sort of quantum conduit, because people who studied mediums, I know a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a PhD who's studying mediums, remote viewers.
Right.
Whenever people get into this part of the world, part of the mind, they start seeing aliens, the classic big-eyed communion alien.
Right.
So who are these guys, and what are they doing?
And exactly. Maybe they're the guides that, you know, when you finally get to the level where your mind expands enough to embrace all of this, you know, maybe they serve as some type of guide to sort of gently bring you along to learn more and more. And why they have been the chosen ones, I have no idea, but I'd be really interested to find out.
But there's some sort of quantum beings, Marie, but what in the world are they?
Exactly, and it could be that they are from a parallel universe that is very similar to ours in terms of, you know, what they're thinking is that we can be the ones to guide you into this next level of reality, those of you that are ready for it. But I also like to think that maybe they're the archetypes of today. They're the new mythology. They're the new gods or entities that we look at for guidance. And we even fear, just like, you know, Zeus was feared in the mythology. So I don't know. Sometimes you can think of it in terms of, well, this is symbolic. What do they symbolize? Perhaps, though, they really are guides. Hey, we've been there, we've done this, we know all about this, let us show you the way. You're ready? You've opened your mind enough to be ready? Okay, we're going to show you the way. That's very interesting. I had not heard that.
Yes, it's a little known known fact, because this different branches of science don't communicate with each other very well.
Exactly.
But it's something that I happen to have discovered, and I find it fascinating. And on that note, we're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back. We're back with Marie D. Jones. Her website, mariedjones.com. Her book, Science, spelled P-S-I-E-N-C-E, is available from Unknown Country's great new Amazon store. You know, Marie, speaking about the connection between the visitors and the dead, we got a letter years ago from a woman whose young daughter had died. It seems that the daughter had come to a friend of the woman and told her to tell her mother that she was okay. This experience was so intense that the person who'd seen the girl got in her car and drove 200 miles to tell the mother, even though she was legally blind.
You know, you just have to think that, again, as David Bohm, the physicist, said, there are these different orders of reality. The explicate, the stuff we see every day. The implicate, which is the underlying order. He also believed there was a third level, which was the super implicate order, and it operated above everything, like a higher quantum level of reality. And this level encompassed consciousness. And what it sounds like is that if this girl's mother, if her consciousness was not open to seeing her dead daughter wanted to find someone whose consciousness was open. and that these entities were guiding her. They were on the other side and saying, look, we'll help you get through so that you can make your point and let your mother know everything's okay. And I think there's something very hopeful about experiences like that. That even if you don't believe, there's somebody out there that their consciousness will be expanded enough to maybe have that experience for you and give that person hope that life does not necessarily end at death. That's the best I can do.
It's one thing I love about your book is it's inquisitive, it's inquiring. You don't feel the need to come up with answers, but what you really are trying to do is ask better questions.
Ask the questions, exactly.
And I think that's all we can do right now, isn't it?
Or
is it?
I think some of this stuff we will find proof of. I don't know that we'll ever know everything. And again, I have this feeling, sort of a gut feeling that for everything that we're going to be able to find proof of and say, okay, we've just explained what a ghost is, how they get here, how they manifest, there's going to be a whole new mystery because we are creating reality and we're creating new mysteries to be uncovered, if only because we love the quest so much. I mean, we love the chase. It's like we're chasing after the Holy Grail, but once you find it, what happens? You want to sort of create another Holy Grail to chase after. So I do think that science, quantum physics, theoretical physics is going to prove some of these things. Or maybe they'll prove themselves. But I also think there's going to be new mysteries to uncover and new manifestations of things that we have no idea even exist, as you and I are talking today.
Well, there's been something. We interviewed someone recently, Lynn McTaggart.
Yes.
About her. She's doing a series of experiments she calls the intention experiment.
The intention, yeah.
Where a bunch of people try and think about, for instance, a wilted leaf and then to see if they can make it turn green again.
Exactly. I'm so excited to see the results. I know they did the experiment, but I don't know what the results were.
Well, at this point, I don't either. But I do know one of the people who helped design it, Dr. Gary Schwartz,
really?
and I'm going to ask him about it next chance I get. But do you think this is really quantum entanglement in action, isn't it?
It is, and I am a believer. I hate to use the word believe, but I guess there's not really.
It's become rather a dirty word. I admit it.
Yeah, it's got such religious connotations.
Yes,
but I feel, I suspect that sounds criminal. Well, I believe that our consciousness is directly related with everything going on in our own lives and out there in the world. And that includes the terrorism, the war, the fear, the ignorance, all of that stuff. And in quantum physics, we're pretty much told from the beginning that the observer, the presence of the observer, changes the outcome of an experiment at the quantum level.
Yes.
That there is a direct link between the consciousness of the observer and the effect of the experiment. I don't know how more simple you can get.
Well, in a way, that proves the existence of God, because there couldn't have been a Big Bang if there wasn't somebody there to see it.
To bang it.
Well, to observe it.
Exactly.
So quantum physics has really proved the existence of God, except that in today's world, religion is too separate from right. God is also getting to be rather a nasty word.
Exactly. We need.
My God's better than your God,
Exactly. Yeah, we've got the whole West versus East thing going on, and it's interesting too because at the most fundamental level, they all are supposed to believe in the same God. But basically, if you look at something like the 0-point field, which is this sort of creative force that Lynn McTaggart wrote about so wonderfully in her book, The Field, which I just love, it sounds like the Force from Star Wars. It sounds like a sort of neutral version of God. And there's so many things in quantum physics that scream that there is intelligence going on here, that there's a blueprint, that there is a web and an intricacy to everything that we see and do and think and intend and have happen to us. And I guess if you want to call it God, that's fine, but I almost feel like that word is not big enough to encompass what's really going on.
We've made that word small.
We have. You're absolutely right. With religion.
Yeah.
With religion. Yeah.
Which is sets of rules and somebody, a way to have power, one person going to have power over another.
Exactly.
Guilt or fear.
And those that don't go along are going to be punished by that God, which means that God is not all loving and all forgiving, and you could just sort of drive yourself crazy trying to figure all that out. But obviously there's something going on, that there is this higher level of order, if you want to call it, and our consciousness is directly linked to it, as if there's a higher consciousness that we are all linked to.
You mentioned Michael Talbot in the book, and we knew him. He wrote The Holographic Universe.
Right.
And we knew him, and shortly before he died from leukemia, he came out to our cabin, was where Whitley was having all these communion experiences.
Right.
And he met a goddess in our front yard.
Wow.
And it was Whitley wrote about this in one of his books, I forget which one, and he thought she was somebody who was selling squash, but because her arms were full of squash. But
Right.
Whitley realized that it was a goddess. And it was almost like a metaphor. It was almost like his future had come and knocked on the door, and he answered the door. He was sleeping on the couch, convertible couch in the living room. And he answered the door and really said hello to his future, embodied in a person who was standing right there in full flesh. And later, the same squash she had in her arms were arranged on the lawn of the fellow who had the fruit stand, vegetable stand, in the little town a few miles away, and in an intricate pattern. And
There's always something going on that we just can't quite grasp.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing.
It was an amazing experience, and I just wanted to share that with you because you mentioned him in the book. I mean, his work still lives today.
Oh, absolutely. And it's funny because you have people like Brian Greene and Michio Kaku talking about the importance of the holographic universe theory and how it still is being considered that theory of everything that, can sort of explain gravity and all of the
and he wasn't a scientist. He was a novelist.
Yeah, but his book was brilliant, and he kind of boldly went where no one had gone before with this, with comparing the work of the brain researchers and how the brain acts almost as if it's a holographic machine, and the universe, and how the two seem to be working in very similar ways. It was just absolutely fascinating.
I think you just said something that really sparks with me. I think that we all have to not be intimidated by science and official pronouncements and New York Times mentality, I like to call it. I lived in New York many years, and I know that well. We have to realize that we can figure things out. We can ask questions. We can discover. We can research. We can explore.
Exactly.
We don't have to listen to those people in academia or at NASA or the scientific establishment. We can look what they missed. They missed global warming. I mean,
yeah. I think because it's school. If you look back to when you were in school, you're learning from your textbooks and your teachers. But those of us that are not in school and are not a part of that,
we're in the school of life.
Right, and we're reading books by all kinds of people with all kinds of ideas, and we're getting a much more well-rounded idea of what reality might be. And, my father, he's a retired scientist, but he will be the first one to tell you that there is a forced rigidity when you are involved in academia. You have to publish a certain way. You have to, do a certain type of research, and you're not always permitted to be the maverick that you might want to be. And yet my dad was always reading about interesting things and always had a very open mind and still does. So you're absolutely right. I mean, I read hundreds of books and before I wrote this one. And I don't know that I could go head to head with a physicist, in a debate, but I think that I understand these concepts pretty well. And I didn't have to go to school to do that. I just really had to open myself up to trying to get them on a sort of a intellectual level as well as on a gut level. And you're right. I think everybody has the ability to do that.
I hope you're getting asked to speak at some colleges. I suspect you're not, but I hope you are.
No, I'm actually going to be doing some speaking engagements, but they're more conferences that are into this kind of thing, I guess you could say. The scientific and academic world will not touch this.
But they need you. They need you to stand up there and open their minds, get the can opener and just flip open their heads.
I think what's going to happen is that when they get out of college, or they'll go on their own to a conference, What the Bleep and Ions, they're doing these wonderful conferences and bringing people together. And that's where the public is getting exposed to it. But universities, they're very rigid. I don't know that they would ever invite somebody like me to come and talk about this stuff. First of all, mainly because I don't have a PhD.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, how well written the book is or how much I know that I could talk about these things. So they have that rigidity that I know that I can't fit into, so it's like, okay, well, what other ways can I get the message out and talk about this stuff?
Well, I just think that this book is so magical, and you explore everything. You're not afraid of anything. You explore the Oregon, which has been, totally poo-pooed. You explore the Bermuda Triangle. You explore other dimensions. You explore faster than the speed of light. I'm flipping through it here. This is fabulous. And it's lots of fun. You have a good time, and everybody's going to have a good time reading it, too. I
thank you.
Did.
I get so excited and enthused about this stuff that I wanted that same energy to come through. It's fun. It's exciting. It kind of gets you all feeling like, wow, what's going on out there? I want to learn more. That's why it was so important, that I list books that other people could read if they want to do more research. Because I just, with my word count, I was only able to touch on some things that I really kept finding more and more information. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how can I fit all this in one book?
Well, that's good news, Marie, because it means we'll be seeing more of your journey soon, and it's an extraordinary one, into what are increasingly coming to seem to be clear scientific explanations for phenomena and experiences that science has always maintained didn't exist at all. Thanks so much for being with us. This is Ann Strieber. Now there's a message from somebody I know pretty well, my husband Whitley.
And this is Whitley Strieber. I'm going to be talking to Marie about what she's going to be doing next and a whole lot of other things, like this new question of whether or not we're even dealing with aliens and the close encounter experience. Is this something that happens between parallel universes? Subscribers, you'll find out. Listen to me and Marie in the subscribers section. Dreamland listeners, next up, Linda Moulton Howe. You're about to experience something you just can't get elsewhere. Emmy Award-winning science reporter Linda Moulton Howe reporting on the absolute leading edge of science, discovery, and the mysteries of the unknown. And this week, she has got a truly extraordinary report. NASA's chief climate scientist, James Hansen, has made a statement about the Earth's atmosphere and what's happening to it that you will literally never forget once you hear it, and it's one that apparently the administration doesn't want to hear at all. Don't miss Linda's website, earthfiles.com, the one science website that tells you the secrets and gives you the facts the others dare not. earthfiles.com. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thanks, Whitley. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reported this year that there is at least a 90% certainty that global warming is man-made and will, quote, continue for centuries, unquote. The IPCC also reports that in coming decades, rising temperatures and rising sea levels will cause floods and mass famine. The implication is that there will be massive dislocations of humans and animals that have traditionally lived near coastlines. Despite this hard data, the George Bush administration has resisted setting CO2 reduction goals, claiming there would be too many economic hardships for Americans. Ironically, it is the United States which dominates the world list of greatest CO2 emitters. One scientist who has been frustrated by the Bush administration's attitude about global warming is James Hansen, Ph.D. and director of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York. Dr. Hansen has publicly criticized the Bush administration for politicizing scientists and scientific data, suppressing information that contradicts presidential biases. Then, in the last week of May, a few quotes began to circulate on the Internet from a major global warming study scheduled for publication in the June 1st, 2007 Journal of Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics. 48 American and French climate scientists, led by Dr. James Hansen, warn about global warming. Quote, amplifying feedbacks are pushing Earth past dangerous tipping points, unquote. An example of amplifying feedback is that as the Arctic warms and ice melts, forests are spreading and expanding, replacing the white ice with dark, heat-absorbing tundra that will contribute even more CO2 back to the atmosphere. Here's another quote. The tipping point toward disastrous effects of global warming could be much closer than most people realize. The NASA GIST study concludes that if Earth nations don't seriously curtail greenhouse emissions over the next 10 years, Earth will be pushed past, quote, critical tipping points with dangerous consequences for the planet, unquote. As if anticipating the NASA report, on Thursday, May 31st, President Bush asked China, India, and a dozen European countries to agree by the end of 2008 on a global emissions goal for reducing greenhouse gases. But the White House press explanation for the timing of the announcement is the upcoming summit in Germany, in which global warming and its consequences will be major topics. Germany is proposing that all nations agree to slow down global warming this century to no more than 2 degrees Celsius, which is about 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Experts say that in order to do that, current greenhouse gas emissions coming out of cars and industries would have to be cut back 50%, that's by half, below 1990 levels over the next 40 years. But the Bush administration has rejected that idea. Contradicting Dr. Hansen and towing the Bush administration's political line, NASA Administrator Michael Griffin told National Public Radio this week he did not know if global warming was a serious problem and said, quote, to assume that global warming is a problem is to assume that the state of Earth's climate today is the optimal climate, the best climate that we could have or have had, or that we need to take steps to make sure it does not change, unquote. But not towing the administration's political line or NASA Administrator Griffin are the 48 American and French scientists who compiled the study published June 1st in the journal Atmospheric Chemistry and Physics. This week, I asked Chris Field, Ph.D. and Director of the Carnegie Institution's Department of Global Ecology and Professor of Biological Sciences at Stanford University, about the tipping point danger as greenhouse gases increase more rapidly and glaciers and polar ice melt faster.
There's an increasing body of experimental evidence that says what's happening is that the ice sheets are melting much more rapidly. What that means is that there are two risks to climate. One is that loss of ice tends to make the underlying surface darker, which absorbs more radiation, which means that the positive feedback from warming gets to be greater. The other is that these land ice sheets, when they melt, tend to raise sea level. And the amount of sea level equivalent that's stored, for example, in the Greenland ice sheet is between 5 and 10 meters, between about 15 and 35 feet of sea level equivalent, really a substantial amount of water.
Yes, and Mr. Hansen told ABC News, quote, CO2 exceeding 450 parts per million in our atmosphere is almost surely dangerous, and that upper limit for avoiding dangerous climate change could well be much lower than 450 parts per million volume of CO2. And that was stated in the context that we're at 383 parts per million volume of CO2 in the atmosphere right now, leaving less than 100 parts per million to increase through the next 90 years just to get through this century. Would you agree that where we're headed in terms of CO2 levels could in fact be what could tip this planet into maybe rapid climate change, much more rapid than it is now?
Well, I think that it has been clear from a wide range of scientific evidence over the last several years that the risk of dangerous anthropogenic human influence on climate is very real and very grave. From my own research and my own reading of the data, it's not 100% clear whether the dangerous anthropogenic influence occurs at 450 parts per million or 500 parts per million or 550 parts per million, but we're definitely headed in a direction where there's a grave risk of dangerous changes to the climate. My personal concern is that anthropogenic emissions of these heat-trapping gases is increasing so rapidly that we may shoot well past 450, we may shoot well past 550 parts per million by the later decades of this century, so that it's not really so much of a question whether the dangerous tipping point occurs at 450 or 550. It's how we get the emissions under control so that we don't shoot past all of the possible points at which the climate change becomes a seriously dangerous issue.
He also made the point that he thinks that there is a decade or less in which the industries of the world and all the nations could pull back on CO2 emissions and maybe have some sort of a calming effect on what could be more rapid climate change than we ever expected. Would you agree that there is only a decade or less left for the planet to decide whether or not it's going to try to pull back on CO2 emissions?
It's hard to know. I hope that we haven't passed an unacceptable tipping point, but I don't think that anyone knows that we have the opportunity to solve the problem without dangerous changes to the climate system.
If China and India don't join in this effort, which hopefully the United States and England and other industrial nations will begin leading a request for CO2 cutbacks and shifts to other than fossil fuel energies, assuming, though, that that might not happen, that China and India, two big CO2 contributors, back away and say that they want their time for industrial development the way we had it, and that increases the CO2 increase even more rapidly than what the IPCC has based the computer models on. What do you think the worst case is for the rest of this century?
Well, I think that the alternative to continued rapid growth in emissions from India and China is that the technologies for high growth in energy without high growth in emissions become the compelling choice for them. And I think that's really where the leadership is required from countries like the United States and Europe. And that's also where the opportunity is. You know, it's like sitting in 1900 and saying, well, what are going to be the big businesses of the 20th century? I don't think there were very many people who were saying that petroleum was going to be the big business of the 20th century. And now in the early years of the 21st century, I think that we're looking at an unknown set of the big businesses, but they're likely to be businesses that can provide copious amounts of energy at low cost without carbon emissions. Based on a recent study completed by the Global Carbon Project and published last week in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, it looks possible that in the absence of controls on emissions, we could be seeing CO2 concentrations at the end of this century that are well above 700 parts per million and possibly even above 1,000 parts per million.
And if that occurred, would we essentially be guaranteed a West Antarctic ice melt contributing to sea level rise even more rapidly than the current computer projections?
Well, we would be looking at substantial amounts of warming during the century. The IPCC range of estimates for global temperatures in 2100 is somewhere between 1.5 and about 6 centigrade warming, or between about 3 and about 11 Fahrenheit of average mean warming, with even more warming at the poles. If we're at the high end of the CO2 emissions, we'll tend to be at the high end of the warming as well. And climate change scenario in which we're looking at more than 10 Fahrenheit of warming is just a dramatically different world than the world of today. And the way to put that in perspective is that the average mean temperature difference between Los Angeles and Death Valley is about 10 Fahrenheit. And we're talking about that level as a worldwide average, and even larger differences in that in the Arctic. It also does mean that commitment to things like long-term sea level rise are greater, commitment to the changes in precipitation and storm tracks that accompany the changes in temperature become greater.
And we're already hearing from a variety of scientists studying this that more and more hurricanes will be more like Katrina, that there will be more and more tornado events like what just took out Greensburg, Kansas. And with increasing storms and more sea level rise and deeper surges from the oceans inland as water does rise incrementally, aren't we talking about the coasts of the entire planet becoming basically unlivable decade by decade by decade?
The issue of sea level rise is a serious one, and it has two really important components. The first is that even a modest amount of sea level rise can lead to rapidly increasing damages, because when you add a small amount of sea level rise, 6 inches or a foot, on top of every storm surge and on top of every spring flood, the damages increase really rapidly. The estimates, for example, in the Sacramento Delta in California are that a 1 foot sea level rise would convert what's currently a flood that's so serious it occurs every 100 years into one that would occur every 5 to 10 years. The other thing that's really important about sea level rise is that we have continued development close to the coast, and as we put more and more infrastructure close to the coast and we subject it to more and more pounding from the rising seas, the losses of property go up much more rapidly than either one alone. And then finally, as you say, it's important to note that the scientific evidence for an increase in the intensity of the largest hurricanes is really pretty clear now, so that even though the number of hurricanes may not increase in a warmer climate, the frequency with which they get to be megastorms is likely to increase.
And where are all the people going to go, whether it's Bangladesh or coastal areas in Africa or the United States, or where? Where is everybody going to relocate to?
I think we really don't know the answer to that question. That is one of the most severe challenges we face. One of the recent conclusions of the IPCC study on impacts and vulnerability, however, is that there are vulnerable people in almost every region, especially the elderly, the poor, and children, and there are vulnerable regions in almost every country, and certainly the experience of the United States with Hurricane Katrina demonstrated that even with all the economic and technical resources that we have, that we couldn't protect the vulnerable parts of our population.
Looking again at the upcoming content from James Hansen and NASA's release, it says the study says, quote, only moderate additional climate forcing, which would mean only moderate additional warming from such emissions, talking about CO2, is likely to set in motion the disintegration of the West Antarctic ice sheet, and that many scientists say that a disintegration of the West Antarctic ice sheet would mean catastrophically rapid sea level rise, unquote. Could you comment on that?
The physics of melting these continental ice sheets is a very difficult problem. There's a lot of recent experimental evidence that said that the estimates that had been built into the climate models were probably too conservative, but we still don't have a precise estimate of too conservative by how much. If the sea level rise from melting of either the Greenland or the West Antarctic sheet is accelerated, we're looking at a commitment to so much sea level rise that many of the world's major coastal cities would have to be relocated or dramatically reinforced within a time period that's certainly much less than the time period over which these cities have persisted.
Whatever the sea level rise is, we're talking about only 9 decades that it could be another 2 to 3 feet higher, correct?
Well, the range of estimates for sea level rise in the most recent IPCC report are in the range up to 2 or a little more than 2 feet. Now, those are maybe conservative based on the new information that's available, but it's unlikely that we'll see more than 10 feet of sea level rise during the century. 1 to 2 feet to 3 feet of sea level rise during the century would impose very major hardships on cities, people, infrastructure around the world, and especially on people in poorest nations.
Well, what would New York and Philadelphia do? They're only 25 feet above sea level. In other words, if we go up 2 to 3 feet over this century, then the surge from storms is going to be that much more constantly right into the city streets, correct?
While that's true in a place like New York, Philadelphia, where there are current risks of water damage, it's during storm events. And what happens with sea level rise is that it takes less of a storm event to create a severe problem. Of course, if at the same time we're getting more severe storm events, we have put ourselves in a double bind. And it may be that by the later decades of this century, we're looking at the need for really massive investments in protecting assets in cities like New York or Philadelphia, much as London has done recently. You know, London has a massive engineering project to prevent high tides from coming up the Thames. They're talking about a massive engineering project to protect Venice. And in the cities that have lots and lots of economic capital, I think that that's what we'll be seeing. In the world cities that don't have access to that, I think we're going to see large-scale abandonment of the areas that are the cities now.
How is London trying to preserve itself?
Oh, it's an amazing engineering project. It's called the Thames River Barrier, and basically it is a series of massive steel structures that can rise up out of the bottom of the river and block high tides from coming up the Thames and flooding London. The important way to think about these coastal events is that when you try and defend a city like London, for example, from high water, this Thames River Barrier was built with the expectation that it might be used once every 10 years or maybe once a year. But now it's at the point where they're already using it several times per year. And as the sea level continues to rise, it will need to be used more and more frequently. And there may be events where even that is not successful.
If insurance companies will no longer insure homes or structures near the shores, doesn't that mean that there is going to be a kind of exodus away from the coastlines beginning already because insurance won't back people up to construct?
Certainly insurance is a critical part of the decisions that people and communities make about where to build and what to build. And I think the fact that it's getting to be more and more difficult to provide insurance for various kinds of coastal structures indicates that the insurance companies, and especially the reinsurance companies, are aware of the risks that they face with ongoing development in the coastal areas. And I think that we should view the insurance companies' reluctance as a clarion for the kinds of problems that we're likely to experience unless we get this problem under control.
And do you agree with James Hansen that we could be closer to a really radical tipping point than anybody realizes?
I think there are many lines of evidence that we have a relatively brief window of opportunity to take the steps to getting the emission of these heat-trapping gases under control.
And if we don't?
If we don't, the risk of unacceptable, damaging changes from climate change are unacceptably grave.
And would come upon us probably sooner than anybody realizes?
Well, I think it's clear that the potential risks of climate change in the next several decades during this century are at the level where the risks are unacceptable with large amounts of climate change. It's very hard to know whether we've crossed a threshold this year or next year or in 5 years, but I think what you need to be clear on is the momentum and the inertia in the world economic and technological systems, and it's that inertia that we need to be working on. We need to be turning the corner, making this huge ocean-going tanker that's the world energy system start to turn. If we don't even start to think about making it turn for 10 or 20 years, there's no hope we're going to get it to turn soon enough.
I was very surprised by the May 30th National Public Radio News interview with NASA's Administrator Michael Griffin. I listened to it in its entirety, and when he said that all that was really known about global warming was a 1 degree centigrade raise in global average temperature in the last 100 years, then I thought, is he not absorbing that the most conservative estimate for this 100 years, the most conservative, is about a 3 degrees Fahrenheit rise over the next 90 years? That would be 3 times the warming of the past 100 years. In anybody's computer, when you triple and quadruple average global warming, it sets in motion dynamics that are huge, unpredictable, and that what we are headed for by the end of the 21st century may not be anything that anybody in their computer sees right now, but that someone like James Hansen, PhD, working for NASA, is worried about. So, Whitley, I don't know where all this is headed, but it's amazing that there are still these many contradictions having to do with the data within our own government.
You know, Linda, it's very interesting that every time I run a show like this about this subject, as happens, I believe, on Coast, we get lots and lots of hate mail from people who are essentially have been driven crazy, I think, by the combination of not wanting it to be true and fearing it and just trying to hide their heads in the sand. And unfortunately, an awful lot of the reason for this is a lack of leadership at the top. Instead of a president saying, yes, we can fix this, we have a president denying it, which is implicitly saying, no, we can't fix it, because everyone with half a brain knows it's true, including all of the ones who are going to write me hate mail about this, saying it's the sun is doing it, or it's a natural process, or it's this, or it's that, or Jesus wants us all to go into the rapture. So I get a lot of rapturists every time we have one of these shows. But boy, I mean, I think in terms of the future, I've got so many friends and family who are having babies right now, and all of these little ones that I hold in my arms, long after I'm gone, are going to be living with this. And this is going to be every day of their lives. There are people being born now who may well see naked stone on the Antarctic continent and see what we now call New York City half submerged in water. Could that really happen, Linda? It's appalling to think.
Well, as a reporter, my whole life has been trying to focus on the pressure of fact, not living up to someone's political bias or manipulation, but simply trying to understand what's happening in the world around me through the pressure of fact. And I remember 20-some years ago sitting in an office at Harvard University with Professor McElroy, who is an atmospheric physicist and was one of the few who began talking about the fact that the building up of CO2 that they were beginning to measure then would, if it continued, would warm the planet. And as I kept reporting simply the facts, I still remember the day that I received a fax and some other feedback when I was doing a coast-to-coast AM radio saying, if you don't like this country, go to Russia. And I thought at the time, this is such an irrational reaction when we all need to pull together for alternative energy systems to fossil fuels so that we can take some control over this and not be the victim of global warming. And
go ahead.
That's what Dr. Hansen is saying.
Well, it's a testament to this is that millions of people listen to lunatic, ill-educated, stupid talk show hosts, and maybe 250,000 people listen to this program, which is not stupid. If it's anything, it's not stupid. And those hosts are screaming constantly that this is all nonsense and that it's bunk. And they don't stop the people who listen are themselves too poorly educated to sit up and realize that they're listening to a bunch of idiots. However, this is the way things fail. This is why societies fail. because people can't face or can't understand. And if then it turns out, the survival of the fittest. And in fact, what will happen over the future is the people who are smartest about this are going to be the survivors. And that's how natural selection works. The people who can't understand, who end up pretending it's not happening, don't make the proper preparations, and they end up not being there anymore. The people who anticipate, the ant instead of the grasshopper, Noah, who listened to his own, he saw where the rain was coming down, he knew something was wrong. The smart ones, they survive. So what will happen is, over the next 150 years, mankind is going to get, the number of human beings on this planet is going to get a lot smaller, probably. But who's going to survive? The brightest. That's what will happen in every society that's affected by this, which will be every society in the world. Linda, we've got about 2 more minutes, so let us know just briefly, and I mean just briefly, what is going on with the drone story.
I received another very interesting email from a man who had a brief military background experience, but he is an engineer today, professional, and has asked, like so many, for anonymity. But the email that he sent that I have posted at Earth Files is yet another eyewitness saying that when he saw the Chad the Chad photograph, that it sparked a memory going back to the mid-1980s, as he recalls, that he was in an air show at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. And he was inside of a big military hangar with a bunch of other people in there. And there, he said, was that, let's call it a drone because none of us know what it is. Here it was. And he said it was about 25 feet long. That's exactly what we've all estimated from the variety of the photographs from Chad in Lake Tahoe and allegedly from Capitola. And he said that the ring, the long tail, or whatever you want to call it, everything was there. And then some military people in uniform came in, ushered those that were looking at it out, and said, sorry, that there had been some sort of an error that was not supposed to be for the public. It was only for military people. And he said that when he saw this, and he started thinking about, well, if that was inside of a large hangar during a Barksdale Air Force Base show in the mid-'80s, whose was that back then? Did we have something that was on display that we had captured, retrieved, been given by, let's say, the non-human intelligence, and we were going to try to work on it, and for some reason it was there on display, and then are the current ones black ops operations back engineered from that?
Wow.
These are the kinds of questions that this man has raised, and you can see his report at Earth Files.
Yeah, I would suggest, folks, that to keep up with this, go to earthfiles.com. Don't miss a single day. Linda Moulton-Howe, thank you very much.
Belief, and I know that I'm not alone in it, that our reality is ever changing, and that each time we uncover one mystery and maybe get the answer to something, it transforms into something else. And this goes to, what's talked about later in the book, which is the role of the observer and the role of our own consciousness in creating what we perceive as our reality.
Oh, I want to talk to you about that. I think we'll wait till after we take a break, but because I know there's something called Fisher information, which basically says that we create our own reality. And in What the Bleep, that wonderful film, What the Bleep Do We Know?
Yes.
One of the quantum physicists says, quantum physics says that we create our own reality. So every day I wake up and I say, it's going to be a great day. And you know what?
Right.
It always is.
Oh, he's good at that, boy. I still haven't quite mastered that.
Yeah, but I thought, boy, if one of the best scientists on the earth says that, heck, I can too, because one thing we're all looking for is, well, how can we use this new knowledge in our own lives?
Exactly. Otherwise, it's exciting and interesting, but kind of meaningless if it doesn't apply to us in a personal sense. I totally agree with that.
And it seems to me that the concept of perhaps creating our reality or perhaps getting into a parallel universe where there's a better reality, if this is possible,
Mm-hmm.
might be one way to use it.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Well, we're going to take a little break now, and then we'll be right back, and we're going to talk about some of Marie's adventures in the paranormal. We'll be right back.
Subscribers, don't miss the video that we've found. It's now in the subscriber section. It's the moment I actually discovered the secret school, which happened during the making of a pilot in 1996, a TV pilot that has until now been completely unaired. Nobody's ever seen it before. I think you'll find it fascinating.
Tell me about some of your adventures. You've had so many phenomenal adventures, and you talk about them in your book.
I've had some experiences of my own. I've been around people that have had tons of experiences, which I think comes with the territory when you're doing investigations. In my own life, I've had some fairly convincing experiences. One when I was a teenager with a friend of mine who had a poltergeist in her home. And, I heard all kinds of horrible stories about it, and I didn't want to go stay overnight ever. And she'd always ask me, and I finally surrendered and caved in, and I was absolutely terrified. Bizarre after all, because when you look at quantum physics, that's where things get really bizarre. So I've had a real similar background in finding over the last 10, 20 years all these connections between what I was learning about in the paranormal field and what I was learning about in quantum physics. And I think it's really exciting because now a lot more people are starting to make those connections.
Well, this book is actually, as well as being a book that explores all kinds of wonderful things like remote viewing, but it also is a wonderful primer, a basic text for understanding quantum physics.
Yeah, and that was my intention. I really knew before I wrote the book that I wanted it to be broken into 3 parts. And I thought, what is my audience? I can't necessarily assume that people are going to know a lot about paranormal. I can't necessarily assume they're going to know a lot about quantum physics or consciousness research. So I thought, I'm going to introduce concepts in a way that I think everybody could understand. I figure if I could understand them as I'm writing them, the reader will be able to understand. And I really wanted to break it down where first I have sort of an introduction into the paranormal. And then we go into a sort of Quantum Physics 101 course. And then the third part of the book, I kind of put everything together and hopefully have set the stage in the prior 2 sections for all of those connections that I'm going to make. It was really important to me, because I'm not a scientist, that I wrote it in a way that I would understand if I were picking up the book for the first time and learning about this stuff for the first time.
You don't have to be afraid of this book, folks, because it is very accessible. It really is. You've done a wonderful job here, Marie. And
thank you.
It also takes us where we all live here on Dreamland. Is what we're interested in is these I hate to use the word paranormal, but that seems to be the only word around. These paranormal things, but we're not interested in believing in them. We're interested in investigating them because these have happened to people.
Right,
to
exactly. We know they're there. We're trying to figure out, what are they? Where do they come from? What's behind them? What is manifesting them? So we know that they exist. Millions of people have seen and experienced all kinds of things. I think to deny that any of these things are real is bad science. But what we need to do now is try to figure out what they are, where they're coming from, and what our role might be in assisting their manifestation.
Well, tell me, I'd like you to pick one of these things and explain to us how quantum physics might have a reason for this, might explain this. I mean, like being a psychic or being a medium or remote viewing or something like that.
That's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that's one of the best areas of psi or the paranormal or the unknown or mysterious, whatever umbrella term you want to give it. That's one of the best areas that you can see the real connections. When we talk about psychic abilities, ESP, remote viewing, the ability to know the future, to see into a distant location, what happens is when we look at quantum physics, we look at some of the most basic principles, we start to see some really interesting connections. And one of them is Bell's theorem of non-locality. Now, this is named after a theoretical physicist, John Bell. And basically, the theory states that particles are all connected on a level beyond time and space. And they can affect each other. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance.
Yes, uh-huh.
And another concept is the theory of entanglement, that once particles come in contact with each other, they remain in contact. They remain entangled, even at vast distances, and they affect each other instantaneously, suggesting that we can beat light speed, that there's something going on here where we're able to beat the speed of light. So those are two real basic theories in quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and yet if you think about what those imply, we're all connected. Everything is connected beyond the space and time. We're all entangled. Therefore, wouldn't it make sense that some of us, if not all of us, are able to look into the future, see what other people are doing even though they're not in the room, remote view a particular location halfway around the world? I mean, if everything is indeed connected by this sort of invisible web of reality, this underlying reality, David Bohm, one of my favorite physicists, called it the implicate order. The explicate order is what we see and perceive on the outside. But there's this implicate underlying order, and if that's all connected, it makes sense that people who are much more in tune with their own ability to do it can connect with other human beings, with other living things, with objects at a remote distance. And that, to me, it makes so much sense.
Well, I know a lot of psychics and mediums. I just happen to have fallen into this.
Yeah.
And I find, and remote viewers, I've met a bunch of government remote viewers many years ago when this was supposed to be a secret program. Dreber, I'm the host for Dreamland this week because I wanted to get a chance to talk to Marie D. Jones, who has written an extraordinary book called Science, but it's spelled differently. It's spelled capital P-S-I-E-N-C-E, Science. And what is science? Well, we're going to find out from Marie. Hi, Marie.
Hi. Thank you for having me on the show.
Well, it's delightful to talk to you. I wanted to start with a little bit of explanation, and then I want you to take off from there.
Okay.
About 20 years ago, I realized that the kind of science I was taught in school, which might be called Newtonian science, was all wrong. And so I set out to gain a layman's understanding of quantum physics, even though I have no background in science. And I was able to do it. And I'm glad about this because if I can do it, anybody can do it. And the truth is, we've all got to do it because this is the way the world really works. Now, about 20 years ago also, my husband Whitley started having these UFO experiences we call the communion experiences. And we started getting letters. We got 500,000 letters, and I read them all from people who were having these crazy paranormal, if you want to call it that, UFO sightings experiences. And I began to realize that these made sense when you looked at them from the quantum point of view. So what do you think about that, Marie?
Well, it's funny because I have a very similar background. I've loved science. I'm not a scientist, but my father's a geophysicist. So I kind of grew up with science, reading and taking classes in college. But the quantum physics part of it I got into through my more metaphysical pursuits. And I always thought it was really strange that there was this wonderful science that they really weren't talking about in the school setting, in the academic setting. And yet now, all these years later, as you said, it really seems to be exploding into people's consciousness, and everybody wants to learn about it, and we've got all these wonderful books coming out. And I think because quantum physics talks about the behavior of particles and matter and energy at the most minute level, and we see such bizarre behavior at that level, we're then able to look at things like paranormal phenomena like UFOs and ghosts and psychic abilities and see that there is not only a connection, but that they're really not so bizarre. Right.
And we've had quite a few of them on our show, and I find that they don't really know the future, But what they know is the present. But
Right.
they know a present that the others, that we can't see.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, they
And
don't
they're,
they don't tell your fortune, but they tell you
Right.
what's going on with you right now.
Exactly. Or they can tell you where you left your car keys.
Yeah.
Because they're able to see objects in the present that we can't perceive with our own eyes. And it's interesting because I think there are different gifts that are given to different people, or different people are able to manifest different gifts. Some people are able to see into the future. And another really interesting theory about quantum physics that helps to explain all of that is the concept of the zero-point field. And this is a field of energy. It's like a sea of energy that we're all swimming in. We're like fish in the ocean, and it fills every inch of empty space. And it's basically particles that pop in and out of existence, and they're fluctuating and vibrating at almost a state of absolute zero momentum. And it's sort of like a force field of all other fields. And Hal Puthoff calls it the self-regenerating grand ground state of the universe.
We know Hal Puthoff.
So basically, yeah, I love his work. And basically this is this field that contains everything in it. All matter, all particles, all energy, all past, present, future, you name it. And so maybe we have people that are able to tap into this zero-point field and access information there about the past, about the present, as in the case of remote viewers, or, maybe what's coming, as in the case of clairvoyance and people who have dreams of the future and visions. So it's really interesting to see these theories that are being talked about in the quantum world that sound so bizarre and have such great implications for all of the things that we are looking at and investigating in the quote-unquote paranormal world.
Well, I think that the average person today can be compared to somebody in medieval time and who thought that if they just kept walking far enough, they would fall off the edge of the earth because it was flat.
Right.
We really don't know what the world is like that we're living in. It's much more extraordinary.
It's amazing, and I have a funny feeling we may never know.
Really? You don't think quantum physics is going to find out the answers?
I have this belief